All right, very good morning, everyone. I hope you're all excited now for listening your next set of presenters. With each group presenting, new and new topics and new projects. I think it's really giving us a lot of confidence and pleasure to see that all of you are able to explore the, proteomics raw data set and trying to give it a good shape based on your learning from the course so far. And that's pretty remarkable because in some way, if you think about, now you are actually very much on the way to do some independent projects yourself, right? Towards your biological problem or even computational problem of interest. There is so much, wealth of data available from the public repositories. If you know how to analyze the data and how to take the data forward with the best predictors, looking at best, possible classifier or the biomarkers per se, or looking at the biological understanding from the pathways. All of that is possible based on just publicly available data set, which is quite a bit available now for proteomics, transcriptomics, and other type of omic technologies. So in this slide, today we are going to invite 5 presenters, starting from Parth Trivedi, and then we have Vaibhav Raj, we have Vishakha, we have Abhinav, and then Aparna. So we will be going one after other. So let's first start with the first presenter. And as usual, we will have 15 minutes long presentation, followed by a short Q&A comments from my side for around 3 minutes. Simultaneously, students are also going to pose more questions along with TAs in the chat box. And that presenter should be trying to answer those during the course of presentation. So first presentation is from Parth Trivedi. He is going to talk about global proteomic analysis of COVID positive and negative plasma samples to decipher the host response towards COVID pathogenesis. In more recent time, when the COVID problem came, there was not much understanding about what is going on, that, why after viral infection, all of a sudden people have so much complication, lot of, coagulation happen, different type of immune response system gets perturbed. And looking at some basic criteria and biochemical parameter, and looking at some of the immune response panels, people are able to predict that there is a huge infiltration of cytokines after the viral infection happens. So therefore, the attention was towards understanding the host responses. What is happening when virus is invading the human, and in response to that, what are all protein changes happening at the proteome scale in the human blood or plasma sample. So it will be really interesting to see what Parth could actually make sense of this data. So let me start first presentation.
Hello and good morning everyone. My name is Parth and today I am going to discuss about the proteomics project, which is global proteomic analysis of COVID positive and COVID negative plasma samples to decipher the host response towards COVID pathogenesis. COVID-19 is a modern global pandemic that we have experienced in the recent past, and the etiological agent responsible for such a deadly pandemic is SARS coronavirus 2. SARS coronavirus 2 is a beta coronavirus which belongs to the Coronaviridae family, and it belongs to the same lineage as that of SARS coronavirus and MERS coronavirus, which have been known to cause pandemics in the past. With respect to SARS coronavirus 2 infection, SARS coronavirus 2 binds to the host cell receptor ACE2 and gains entry into the host cell and causes infection. Right from the onset or beginning of the pandemic to till date, it is seen that the COVID-19 case severity has been found to be increasing. Earlier, it was found that vast majority of the COVID-19 patients were reported to have mild to moderate diseases, and very few fell into the critical or severe disease state conditions. However, in the recent study, it was observed that the patients fell majority into the critical disease state conditions and not in moderate disease state conditions. And thus, it can be seen that the patients are rapidly progressing from moderate disease state to critical or severe disease states. The routine diagnostic methods such as molecular testing or serological testings have been proved wonderful in diagnosis of the COVID-19 cases, but they do not give us a clear picture about the progression of diseases in the patient. This is where the biochemical monitoring helps us. Approaches such as proteomics will help us in monitoring the disease progression in the patients and we can thus monitor closely whether the patient is progressing from mild disease state conditions to severe disease state conditions. And thus this was the aim behind this project, where we utilized the global proteomic analysis approach to find out the differential host response in the COVID positive and COVID negative patients. In this project, the plasma samples were collected from COVID positive patients and COVID negative patients, and global proteomic analysis was done to find out the differential host responses. So the project workflow was as per this, where I was provided with the MaxFont data file, which consisted of 71 samples which were unpaired, and it had two groups, positive and negative, and a total of 1206 peaks were found to be recorded, which consisted of 58.7% missing values, for which I did the meta-analyst analysis, where I did data filtration and normalization. Further, after normalization, I went on to do statistical tests to obtain the significantly differentially expressed genes. Along with, I did pathway analysis and gene interaction studies to ultimately find out the key pathways and proteins, which are nothing but the differential host response that we see in COVID positive and COVID negative conditions. So the first step of the analysis was missing value imputation and normalization. So around since I had 58.7% missing values in my data, I went on to substitute those missing values where the missing values of more than 30% were removed, and KNN feature-wise algorithm was used to substitute those missing values. After missing value imputation, the data was normalized using median and log transformation. After the data normalization, principal component analysis was done, which is a non-supervised clustering, where you can see that the positive and the negative plasma samples were shown to have significant overlap with each other. And similarly, PLSDA analysis was carried out, which is a supervised clustering, and we can see that there are no outliers seen with respect to positive as well as negative samples. A correlation plot was analysis was done to find out whether the samples correlated with each other or not, and we can see here that the samples are nicely correlating with each other. Similarly, a heat map plot was generated to find out the pattern of responses in the positive and negative samples, and we can see here that the genes are differentially expressed with respect to that of negative COVID patients and positive COVID patients. Once we have all this generated, I went on to identify the significant proteins in my data. Thus, I did t-test analysis, where I kept the p-value cutoff as 0.05. So all these proteins which passed the p-value cutoff of 0.05 were found to be significant. So a total of 94 such significant proteins were found. Similarly, fold chain analysis was done, where the fold chain cutoff value was kept as 1.5, and thus I found out significantly 63 significantly downregulated proteins and 56 significantly upregulated proteins in my data. Now, to utilize both of these together, that means the differentially expressed proteins which pass the cutoff value of 0.05 and fold chain value of 1.5, I did volcano analysis, where I found out 40 such significantly downregulated and 31 significantly upregulated proteins in my data. So after obtaining these significantly up and down regulated proteins, I went on ahead to find out that where do these proteins belong to, and thus I used Panther to identify where do these proteins belong. So in Panther analysis, I found out that the majority of the protein belong to the biological process of either regulation or cellular processes. Similarly, they belong to the protein class of either defense or immunity class of proteins, or proteins binding activity modulator. And the pathway they were found to be highly suitable or placed into were either of the blood coagulation or the plasminogen activation cascade. Further, I went on to use reactome analysis to find out the top significant pathways where I found out pathways such as platelet degranulation, response to elevated platelet cytosolic calcium levels, complement cascade, regulation of the complement cascade, neutrophil degranulation, and so on. And similarly, thus the same results were obtained when I used Metascape analysis to find out the top significant pathways, and both of them showed the same results. Once I had the significant pathways, I went on to the GSEA analysis to find out the top down-regulated proteins and top up-regulated proteins in my COVID positive and COVID negative plasma samples. And I found out that in the top down-regulated proteins such as histidine-rich glycoprotein, insulin-like growth factor, extracellular matrix protein, intracellular adhesion molecule 2, which is ICAM, and selectin molecules were found to be down-regulated, whereas proteins such as VWF or von Willebrand factor, carboxypeptidase B2, alpha-2 macroglobulin, fibrinogen beta chain, and haptoglobin-related proteins were found to be upregulated. Further, I went on to do string analysis to find out the relation between these upregulated and downregulated genes, and I found out that and did K-means clustering and did K-means clustering for the same, and I found out that the KEGG pathway analysis in the string showed that the genes belong or the proteins belong to the complement cascade or coagulation pathway, innate immune response pathway, or extracellular matrix associated proteins. Once I have all these data, I went on ahead with the biological interpretation for the same, where I found out where it can be seen that the complement cascade pathway is one of the well-known pathway, which is activated by SARS coronavirus 2. So SARS coronavirus 2 is known to activate the classical pathway of the complement along with lectin pathway and alternative pathway. And it is found that it has been seen that the SARS coronavirus 2 is responsible for upregulation of these complement cascade pathways. And it is seen that for the progression of disease from non-severe to severe, complement cascade has been found to be majoritarily upregulated in severe COVID-19 cases. And thus, it was shown in the data that complement C5 protein, C4b binding protein alpha chain, or MASP1 binding protein were found to be very much significantly upregulated in the positive COVID-19 plasma samples. However, they were mildly found to be functioning in case of negative COVID-19 plasma samples. Similarly, with respect to neutrophil degranulation pathway, it has been found that upon neutrophil activation, neutrophil degranulation takes place, which leads to formation of neutrophil extracellular traps, and it leads to thrombus formation in COVID-19 conditions. So the higher the levels of such kind of neutrophil extracellular traps or NETs, higher is the requirement for respiratory support and lower is the survival in the patients. And thus we can see that because of these NETs, it can promote an inflammatory environment, or it can form abnormal inflammation, and it can provide abnormal scaffold for coagulation, and thus increases the risk of thrombosis. And thus we can see that the proteins such as carboxypeptidase B2 or histidine-rich glycoproteins, which are nothing but the proteins involved in the thrombosis or coagulation pathway, are found to be upregulated in the positive COVID plasma samples and downregulated in case of negative COVID plasma samples. Lastly, you can see that the platelet activation signaling and aggregation pathway are also one of the important pathway with respect to COVID-19 cases, where we can see that the proteins such as VWF have been shown to have elevated levels in COVID-19 conditions, where elevated levels of such proteins leads to thrombosis, where you can see that in normal conditions, VWF protein is known to degranulate or is known to cause degranulation of the large complexes of the thrombosis, whereas in case of COVID-19, it is found that it is unable to do so and thus leads to thrombosis. It is also seen that fibrinogen binds to the ICAM molecules or the integrin receptors present on the host cell surfaces and thus leads to the activation of the coagulation cascade. And thus we can see that proteins such as VWF factor or alpha-2 macroglobulin or fibrinogen beta chain are found to be significantly upregulated in the positive COVID-19 conditions and have to be downregulated in negative COVID-19 conditions. And thus we can find that there is a correlation between platelet degranulation, platelet activation signaling and aggregation, and formation of fibrin clot or clotting cascade. And we can see that all these pathways are nicely correlating with each other, where where activation of one leads to signaling cascade and activation of the other pathways and leads to overall disease conditions or severity in the disease conditions. And thus monitoring these proteins which are responsible for platelet degranulation or activation of the coagulation cascade or formation of the fibrin clot can be used to monitor and thus can be used as the markers for point of care devices and can be used as blood biomarker analysis for personalized medicines. So here we can see that there is very clear differential host response seen during the COVID-19 case infections. And we can find, we were able to find out that the dysregulated pathways such as complement cascade, innate immune response pathways, neutrophil degranulation, platelet degranulation, platelet activation, or blood coagulation coagulation cascades have been found to be differentially expressed in positive COVID conditions and negative COVID conditions. Similarly, the differentially expressed proteins belonging to such pathways such as ICAM, fibrinogen beta chain, HRG, VWF or CBP2 have been found to be differentially upregulated and downregulated with respect to COVID-19 positive and COVID-19 negative conditions. And thus monitoring monitoring the levels of these differentially expressed proteins can be utilized for monitoring the disease progression in patients. And thus proteomics forms a promising approach for study of such kind of progression in COVID-19 diseases. So these are my references.
All right, Parth, are you there? Can we talk to you?
Yes, sir.
Very clear.
Sir, your voice is breaking.
Give me 1 second. All right, any improvement? Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
All right, yeah, I said it is a good start of presentation, today's presentation. And it was quite clear presentation describing how COVID-19 negative group is different than positive group. My first question to you is, when you saw too much missing value, almost 58% or so, did you try even looking at each group separately and see, like, what is happening in positive alone, negative alone?
Yes, sir. So when I saw that it has a majority of the data which is missing, so then I tried to do the differential or within the group analysis, but then the metabolist is unable to do so because the current software that we have needs two groups. But then it was difficult for me to analyze for within the group variation.
That's right.
So
very good. You made some effort, but ideally, what you can also do when you look at something like this, you can just use your own, basic maths and use Excel sheet, right? Look at,
Yes.
let's say, each group separately. Anything above 30%, you discard that, and below that, you can, whatever you have, then you can do some median and you can try to impute some missing value based on Excel itself. That could be done for each group. You can look into that, and then you
Yes,
can
sir.
combine the data for as a input list for the next Perseus or Metabon list, right? That could be tried.
Yes, sir.
Additionally, when I look at your correlation plot, did you make any observation that few samples are outlier over there?
No, sir. As such, there were no such outliers present in the data, but then the samples were very much correlated, and it is obvious because we can see that there are various kinds of false positive or negative kind of results obtaining because of overlap of proteins between the healthy patients and the diseased patients, and thus we can observe that these kind of observations do come up when we do such kind of analysis.
Right. I think at least 2 samples were slightly odd, so that could have been looked into. Which
The
were
first 2 samples, right?
Yeah, so that could have been tried out, whether by eliminating some samples, which is not correlating so well, whether you can improve your overall data quality. One observation I had, I think somewhere you had mentioned on the slide about diagnosis, COVID-19 diagnosis. But essentially, when you're comparing negative and positive group, what are you trying to understand? Are you looking at diagnosis here or something else?
So with respect to diagnosis slide, it was I was trying to show that whereas the routine diagnostic helps us to identify the positive and the negative cases, but then it fails to give us a picture about the severity of the COVID-19, and therefore routine diagnostic wouldn't help us. So we had to go for the
Ideally,
proteomic
when you're
analysis.
looking at, in this case, host response, you're looking at disease prognosis, how disease can progress.
Yes, sir.
And effort based on the host protein may not be best way of diagnosing the virus.
Exactly.
But here you're looking at the disease progression and disease response, right?
Yes, sir.
And your time is up, but just one last question. I think you, based on your understanding of disease based on the pathways, which among the 3, 4 which you have described from the complement, neutrophil, platelet, as well as the innate immune response, which among these 4 would you try to pick up one of those to put your bet on for the next set of experiment?
I would really try to work upon the complement cascade because it's kind of a trade-off for the host that if it is in a certain limit, it will benefit the host, but then if it goes beyond the control, it would lead to disastrous effects, which we can see such as cytokine storm. So importantly, we would try to analyze those things in the patient samples and progress and monitor for a longer extent. Thus, we would get a better clear picture of it.
All right, so there cannot be a single answer to this question.
Yes,
Given that you had set of protein which looks interesting, I think your rationale could also be fine. All right, so good presentation. Let me now move on to the next
Thank
presentation.
you, sir.
All right, so now next is Vaibhav Raj, and he's going to talk about moving from COVID to the deadly cancer glioblastoma, right? This is one of the tumor for which from decades there is still not much improvement in the patient care. Patients which are getting the 4th grade of gliomas in the brain tumor known as glioblastoma, their survival rate is very poor. Within 6 months to a year or 1.5 years, most of the patients die. And these tumors are quite heterogeneous in nature. Uh, Heterogeneous, when I say, it means like within the grade 4 also, you cannot say every patient is of the same type of aggressive tumor, or within that same observations can be made. So therefore, there has been emphasis from the clinicians and molecular biologists to try and understand the heterogeneity of these aggressive tumors, and in this case, the 4th grade glioblastoma tumor. When these clinicians give a specific type of chemical for the patient to engulf and use that ALA reagent for the doing the surgery, during that time they can see some regions are getting more fluorescent and some are getting less fluorescent within the same tumor type of 4th grade of tumor. Now, what could be significance of that and how to understand and decipher biological function alterations based on this is going to be unveiled by Vaibhav Raj. So let's listen to the next presentation.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Vaibhav Raj. I'm a student of MTech Biomedical Engineering first year. My topic with the presentation is global proteomics analysis of fluorescent glioblastoma versus non-fluorescent glioblastoma sample to decipher the biological alteration. The presentation comprises of the slide as shown. We will start with the introduction part, followed by the glioblastoma biology, treatment, workflow, metaboanalyst, reactome analyst, string, and conclusion. Starting with a brief introduction of glioblastoma. Glioblastoma is the most aggressive and common form of primary brain tumor found in adult. It involves glial cell and small areas of necrotic tissue surrounded by anaplastic cells. It is a type of eristocytoma, cancer that forms star-shaped shell in the brain called eristocytes. The median survival rate in the case of glioblastoma patient is very poor. It's less than 24 months. Despite the aggressive multimodal treatment that include the maximum resection surgery and the chemotherapy and radiation therapy, the results are very poor. For the glioblastoma biology, according to the WHO, glioblastoma are classified according to their likely rate of growth. Grade 1 and grade 2 are considered to be low-grade glioblastoma, which are well differentiated, usually associated with better outcome, whereas a grade 3 and grade 4 glioblastoma are considered to be high-grade gliomas, which are undifferentiated, anaplastic, and have worsened prognosis. The common sign and symptom of glioblastoma brain tumors include headache, seizures, nausea, vomiting, and memory loss. Coming to the treatment part of the glioblastoma, the use of 5-ALA-induced fluorescence in glioblastoma surgery has shown up to be a double the extent of gross total resection and 6-month progression-free survival. Studies have demonstrated that the maximizing the extent of tumor resection is a significant factor that improves the overall survival of the glioblastoma patient. However, the surgeon ability to achieve a gross total resection is challenged by the lack of discernible tumor margin, given the diffusely infiltrating nature of the glioblastoma. The use of 5-ALA fluorescent guided surgery aims at extending the boundaries of glioblastoma resection. It can able to distinguish between the tumor core, the infiltrating areas, and the healthy areas of the tumor or the brain. The 5-ALA fluorescent guided surgery leads to the overproduction and proliferation accumulation of the fluorescent molecule PPIX in the malignant and neoplastic cell. The surgeon can use a surgical microscope modified for fluorescence imaging to eliminate the surgical field with red, blue light, and tumor tissue with sufficient PPIX molecule will demonstrate a visible red pink fluorescence, whereas the normal tissue which lacks the PPIX molecule will not show any kind of fluorescence. As you can see here, the image A comprises the MRI image of the brain that consists of the glioblastoma tumor. The image B comprises of the fluorescent guided surgery of the brain of the glioblastoma tumor. Here you can see it can be easily be distinguishable between the tumor core, the infiltrating areas, and the normal healthy tissues. But the effectiveness of this 5-ALA induced fluorescence surgery is compromised by the observed heterogeneity of the tumor fluorescence, such that the tumor tissue with histopathologically indistinguishable features will demonstrate different fluorescence characteristic from light fluorescence to no fluorescence. The workflow that I followed, the data file obtained from the MaxPoint is further used for statistical analysis in meta-analysis, and for the pathway analysis, I have used a reactome and a string. The data obtained after the overall analysis is further used for the data interpretation with the previously published literature. For the meta-analyst, the data file that I have found contains a total of 17 samples, in which 2 groups are there. One group contains the non-fluorescent samples, another contains the fluorescent samples. A total of 14% of the missing value is being found, so that a missing value imputation is to be done, in which remove the data which contains missing value greater than 30% are being removed, and the KNN feature-wise function is being used. For the normalization and the log transformation, normalization by median and log transformation used, and finally for a statistical analysis, what I have found is PCA plot, fold change, volcano plot, correlation, and the heat map. The data normalization is basically done to minimize the run-to-run variation of the data, and to maintain the central tendency of the data. The normalized sample-wise view of data, as you can see, and for the normalization, I have used the normalization sample by median, and log transformation is being used. For further the fold chain analysis, for fold chain analysis, I have used a fold chain threshold of 2 The direction of the comparison is between the fluorescent versus non-fluorescent. A total of 48 significantly up and 91 significantly protein was found. What the fold change shows is like how the protein were affected between the two samples. And for the t-taste analysis, it's a parametric test in which I have selected the group variance as unequal. The pre-threshold values is said to be as 0.05. A total of 65 significant protein and 970 significant protein that passes the pre-threshold value of 0.05 is to be found, and 974 unsignificant is found. For the volcano plot, which uses the both fold chain as which uses the both t-test as well as the fold chain analysis, a total of 26 significant proteins found, in which 19 protein were significantly up and 7 significantly down. These are the list of the protein that I found after the volcano plot. For the PCA component analysis, it is a type of clustering method which shows the variation between the two clusters, that is the fluorescent and the non-fluorescent. Non-fluorescent, and the 2D score plot that shows the sample is homogeneous and there is no outlier is being found. The PLSDA analysis, which is same as the PCA analysis, the only difference is that here the data is supervised between the two clusters. For the VIPS score, that shows the protein having the maximum variation between the protein that has the maximum variation between the two samples. Here you can see the P07360 protein has the maximum variation between the two samples, that is the fluorescent and non-fluorescent sample. For the reactome analysis, I have used the same file, same initial file that I used for the MetaboAnalyst. In the case of reactome gene analysis, what I have done, I have used the top 25 protein that I find in the volcano plot for the reactome gene analysis, and I have found some of the pathway that is upregulated. The key pathway that I have found to be upregulated are neutrophil denaturation, glycogen synthesis, saffron mediated autophagy, glycogen metabolism, innate immune system. For the reactome analysis, GSE, I have used the same file that I used in the MetaboAnalysis, and I have found some of the pathways significantly upregulated: the immune system pathway, the homeostasis pathway, and the extracellular matrix organization. These are the top upregulated pathway that I have found in the reactome GSE analysis. The top upregulated pathway include the formation of the fibrin clot, intrinsic pathway of the fibrin clot formation, common pathway of fibrin clot formation, disease of homeostasis, and terminal pathway of complement. I have proceeded with the most common pathway that I found in the reactome analysis, GSF analysis, that is the formation of the fibrin clot. The formation of the fibrin clot at the site of injury to the wall of the normal blood vessel is an essential part of the process to stop the blood loss after the vascular injury. The formation of fibrin clot is being divided into three pathways. This clotting cascade is a extrinsic pathway, intrinsic pathway, and the common pathway. The relation of this formation of fibrin clot, I have rated this via like the angiogenesis in glioblastoma is poorly organized and therefore tends to associate with the tumor necrosis, hemorrhage, and thrombosis. This leads to the formation of fibrin-rich extracellular matrix, which could provide important adhesive cues for glioblastoma growth and proliferation. That can be used as a potential marker for the glioblastoma's therapy. To establish that the blood clotting takes place in the extracellular matrix of the malignant brain tumors, we assess the fibrin formation in the tumor samples from the patient with astrocytoma and glioblastoma using the immunohistochemistry compared to the normal brain tissue, which is essentially fibrin-free. This analysis revealed a marked upregulation of the fibrin clot formation in the glioblastoma patient with a high-grade tumor, that is astrocytoma grade 3 and grade 4, showing a differentially upregulated pathway for the fibrin formation, whereas the low-grade astrocytoma, that is the grade 2 and grade 1, however, expressed 3 to 3.4 fold less fibrin than that of the grade 3 and 4. Whereas this indicates the glioblastoma indicating the degree of the clot formation positively correlates with the tumor grade. This finally tends to prove. So finally, the specific upregulation in the high-grade astrocytoma, which promotes infiltration and the proliferation of the glioblastoma stem cell by the integrin beta-3 and fibronectin pathway. So finally, we can prove like this fibrin clot formation can be used as a potential biomarker for the glioblastoma treatment. For the string analysis, I have used the top 40 upregulated protein found in the volcano plot. Initially, I was using the top 25 upregulated protein found in the volcano plot, but the analysis was not so much good. That's why I have used the I have changed the fold chain analysis to 2 to 1.2, and so I have found the 40 upregulated protein in volcano plot that I have used in the string analysis. Here the 3 clusters were found. Most of them I have related to the literature earlier published as the fibrin as a target for glioblastoma detection and treatment, differential retinoic acid signaling in tumors for long and short-term glioblastoma survivors. Finally, to the conclusion, statistical analysis of data was done using the Metabo analysis. For the pathway analysis of the subsequent protein found via the reactome analysis and string, what happened, like even with the advancement in the gross total resection, the GTR of the glioblastoma tumor, efficacy is compromised due to heterogeneity of the tumor. The ALA positive refers to the high-grade tumor areas with high cell density, meiotic activity and necrosis, whereas the ALA negative, that refers to the healthy areas or either the infiltrating areas of the tumor, refers to the infiltrated area by the tumor cell. The fibrin clot formation pathway that plays a significant role in glioblastoma can be used as a major target for the therapy of the glioblastoma. The ALA positive and ALA negative samples taken from the same patient having the glioblastoma have the same histopathology but the different level of fluorescence due to their heterogeneity. Each region of the glioblastoma are characterized by distinctive tumor supporting pathway, and the glioblast and both the fluorescent and non-fluorescent samples of the glioblastoma show a different level of necrosis, whereas such as the fluorescent glioblastoma sample is having a high level of necrosis as compared to the non-fluorescent glioblastoma sample. Here are the differences that I have used. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Vaibhav. So are you there? Can we talk to you?
Yes, sir.
All right, let me set the timer for you. Okay, so I think it was a good effort towards understanding a very complex disease, brain tumor and glioblastoma. Let me start first with your heat map, which you showed. Can you explain, was that supervised clustering or unsupervised heat map?
Sir, it was a supervised clustering.
No, I think you're not correct, because what you showed was essentially unsupervised, because one of the patients from the ALA group was mapped to the non-ALA group, right? So fluorescent group, one of them was in the non-fluorescent group. So I was really hoping to hear your comments, which somehow you focus mainly on the VIP plot, VIP score on the slide, and you did not talk much about the heat map. But that was a interesting observation could have been made that given the heterogeneity and when you do unsupervised clustering, you can see that all fluorescent and all non-fluorescent are not mapping to to the same cohorts, and one is mismatch. Then one could have looked at what happened to that patient, what was the detail of that individual, and then try to understand the differences, why it is being mapped to the non-ALA group. All right. Now coming to the as you have already understood and explained the problem at hand, which is based on the 5 amino levulinic acid ALA reagent, which is being taken by the patients. Now, do you have some understanding that when the ALA intake happens, then how that works in the individuals, how that can be utilized in the operation theater by the surgeons?
Like, so after going through the literature review, I have seen like before doing the surgery, the 5-ALA group is induced to the patient orally before 30 minutes before the anesthesia incision. After that, the surgeon, after opening the brain for the surgery, they uses a special kind of light under fluorescence, and only those part that absorb that that shows that PPIX molecule, photopyrin molecule, after the intake of ALA group will show some kind of fluorescence. And after that, it will be a.
Here, I wanted to hear this term from you, so protoporphyrin, and that works in which pathway, this particular molecule?
Not read that.
It's mainly involved in the heme biosynthesis. Okay, and that's where, yes, I'm sure you have read that as well, right? So now I want to come to the final part of your pathway analysis, when you found at least fibrin clotting is one of the important outcome of this analysis, right? So what could have been looked in slightly more closely was how it is important that fibrin clotting is within the non-fluorescent and fluorescent of the GBM, as compared to thinking about the lower grade versus higher grade, because right now what we are talking is only higher grade, and only in context of the glioblastoma how fibrin clotting could be an important factor within the two groups. One is fluorescent, one is non-fluorescent. So where you could have brought in a little bit more biology was essentially in context of heme biosynthesis pathway, because that's where the major your target is with the ALA, right? And how that could be linked to fibrin clotting, right? So I understood you made good effort of trying to understand the pathways, but this is where I thought a little bit more connection could have been brought in if you would have thought about the target, which is the heme biosynthesis pathway, and what you see changes happening is within the fibrin clots. Somewhere you got digressed and you started comparing the lower grade and higher grade, which was not the case here. It's every individual is higher grade only, right? Would you like to add anything that can you think about any connection within the pathways and the heme biosynthesis?
So I have I've been, I've understood that fibrin clotting pathway, but not in the respect of heme pathway. Like what I have seen in the literature's review, like for the grade 3 and 4, which are considered to be a high grade glioblastoma, the amount of the fibrin clot formation in the extracellular matrix of the brain at the tumor region is higher as compared to the lower grade glioblastoma. So what I thought, like it would be a great marker or a target for identification of.
Right. There is no higher grade glioblastoma and lower grade glioblastoma. Higher grade gliomas and lower grade gliomas. Glioblastoma is the highest grade, right? All right. I think overall good effort. Given that all of you have different backgrounds, some of you come from biology, some of you come from more computational, but finally, I think overall you try to make a good presentation, and slides and other contents are quite good. All right, that's all for you. So let's move on to the next presentation. Okay, so now next is Vishakha, and she's going to talk about another type of brain tumor, which is meningioma. It arises from the meninges of the brain, and here the emphasis is by the radiologist who is taking images of each of the tumor. And based on the image pattern from radiology, they find that some tumors are having different location of tumor in the brain, and some are having different location. Based on that, this term comes as the skull-based, more towards the central region, or supratentorial more to the periphery. And then how these two grouping of the patients could be important towards the the patient's final outcome, and what kind of biological changes are happening in those. So let's look at this interesting topic, and here Vishakha.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Vishakha Pate, and my proteomics project is on global proteomic analysis of skull base versus supratentorial sample to decipher the biological alteration. So basically, here we will be looking at meningioma sample from two different locations, that is skull and supratentorial region. So meningiomas are the brain tumors which originate from meninge region. Meninge region is further classified into three layers, that is dura mater, arachnoid, and pia mater. Most of the meningioma originate from middle layer, that is arachnoid layer. Meningioma is classified according to WHO into three categories, that is grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. Most of the meningioma, that is 90% of the meningioma, is in grade 1, which is benign. 7% is atypical, grade 2, and last category 2%, which is in grade 3, are aggressive or anaplastic meningioma. This classification is done based on cell morphologic characteristic and histopathological features. Meningioma is more prevalent in female. Female to male ratio of meningioma is approximately 2:1. Diagnosis of meningioma is done by CT and MRI. Treatment of meningioma is mostly surgery followed by radiation therapy, and chemotherapy is hardly done because it is ineffective. Meningioma has high rate of reoccurrence even after treatment or even after removing by surgery. The rate of reoccurrence of meningioma is as high as 50%. Meningioma is further classified into two, based on location, into two types, that is skull base meningioma and supratentorial or non-skull base meningioma. The figure here shows figure A is skull base and figure B is supratentorial, which is mostly a cerebral type of meningioma. Skull base meningiomas are very difficult to access, and hence it is difficult to remove them during surgery. Supratentorial region are as easy to access as compared to skull base meningioma. Why do we need proteomics from meningioma? Because meningioma are slow growing and they remain asymptomatic for years before they are being detected. Also, they have a high rate of reoccurrence. So we need new molecular markers and targeted therapies for their early diagnosis. Also, they are difficult to remove. That's why we need a new clinical treatments. Protein profile can point towards a novel therapy for a personalized care. So the workflow which I followed, this is the workflow which I followed. So basically I had 21 samples, out of which 7 were skull base and 14 were supratentorial. 4,639 peaks were present in my samples. Samples were not paired and I had 0% missing value. So MaxQuant output data file was put into MetaboAnalyst for normalization and various statistical tests. Normalized file from MetaboAnalyst was given to GSEA for further analysis of pathways, and the volcano plot proteins which were obtained from MetaboAnalyst was given for Panther, Metascape, and Reactome for further analysis. So normalization was done in MetaboAnalyst. The normalization which I performed was by median and log transformation. The left figure shows feature-wise normalization and right figure shows sample-wise normalization. After that, correlation plot was seen. In correlation plot, I got to know that my samples are correlated with one another, and the samples which are in pink color are highly correlated with one another. PCA and PLSDA analysis were done. In principal component analysis, I got to know that my samples do not segregate properly as skull base or supratentorial. In PLSDA analysis, the samples were separating as skull base and supratentorial. Further fold change analysis and t-test were done. In fold chain analysis, fold chain threshold was 1.5. Direction of comparison was skull-base and supratentorial. Significantly downregulated proteins were 464 and upregulated proteins were 398. In t-test, group variance was unequal, p-value threshold was 0.05, and significant proteins were 147. Then volcano plot was done, which is a combination of fold change and t-test. Here also fold change threshold was 1.5, p-value threshold was 0.05. After that, I got significantly upregulated protein as 64 and significantly downregulated protein as 65. Then VPI score basically showed the proteins which are differentially expressed in skull base and supratentorial region, out of which last two proteins were of important. Transforming growth factor beta 1 induced transcript 1 protein, which is present in skull base. This protein is involved in signaling, and the last protein, EGF, containing fibrillin-like extracellular matrix protein, which is present in supratentorial region, and it is used in extracellular. It has its role in extracellular matrix organization. Then heat map was taken. Pink region is skull base and green region is supratentorial region. So in this first, the proteins here in blue region are very less as compared to supratentorial region, and the protein in pink are more as compared to supratentorial region. So further Panther analysis was done. Panther analysis showed us the proteins which are associated with different processes. So in Panther analysis, various processes like biological processes, molecular function, cellular component, and protein class were seen. So in molecular function, catalytic activity and binding were the major processes. In biological processes, cellular processes and metabolic processes were the main processes, and in cellular component, cellular anatomy entity was the major one. In protein class, major protein were from scaffold adapter protein and metabolite interconversion enzyme. Then proteins from volcano plot were taken for Metascape analysis, having p-value threshold as 0.05 and fold chain as 1.5. Total proteins were 129. These proteins were given for Metascape analysis, and these are the various pathways which came out. Translation, cytoplasmic translation, then supramolecular fiber organization, regulation of cellular component, regulation of growth molecules associated with elastic fibers, etc. Then upregulated pathways in skull base. So here the volcano proteins from volcano plot which were upregulated were given in reactome to do this analysis. So the major pathways which I got for skull base are signal transduction and metabolism. Then the downregulated proteins in volcano plots were given for reactome analysis in this part. So actually the downregulated protein in volcano plot are upregulated in supratentorial region. So in supratentorial region, metabolism of RNA, metabolism of protein, and extracellular matrix are the major pathways which are upregulated. So these are the pathways which are upregulated and downregulated, which I got from reactome. So in upregulated pathways are mostly signaling and small transport molecule pathways, and the downregulated pathways are translation pathways, the pathways which are involved in translation, and extracellular matrix organization pathway. Further GSE analysis was done. For GSE, a normalized file from MetaboAnalyst was given for GSE analysis. It also showed the proteins, pathways which are significantly upregulated and downregulated. So the significantly upregulated pathways are signal transduction, metabolism, transport of small molecules, and downregulated pathways, extracellular matrix organization, metabolism of RNA, etc. Further, the string analysis was done. In string analysis, t-test fast proteins were used, and the highest score confidence was 0.9. K-mean clustering was done, and number of clusters were 3. So here in the red regions are the proteins of extracellular matrix. In green region shows the proteins which are from metabolic pathways. Green region shows high interaction with proteins from green region show high interaction with one another. Also, the main proteins from proteins from extracellular matrix also interact with one another. So what I interpret from all this analysis is that PI3K and AKT signaling pathways are highly upregulated in skull-based meningioma. So PI3K and pathway is an oncogenic pathway in not only in meningioma but also in many cancer. It affects a downstream. Its downstream target affects the cellular metabolism, motility, proliferation, growth, survival. This is one of the frequently dysregulated pathways in human cancer. So in actually this pathway is activated by MET. MET activates PI3K. PI3K then phosphorylates AKT, and then AKT activates mTOR. So the inhibitors of mTOR can be used for therapeutic treatments in skull-based meningioma. Also, there in most of the skull-based meningioma, there has been seen a mutation in AKT gene. The mutation is AKT1E17K, and this mutation activates mTOR as well as ERK signaling pathways. This mutation indicates shorter time to tumor reoccurrence compared to wild type. This means that if this mutation is present, then the tumor reoccurrence chances are, the time for tumor reoccurrence is very less.
All right. So Vishakha, are you there? Can we talk to you? Okay. All right, good. Yeah. So it was another type of complex problem to look at correlation based on the radiological observation of the tumor location, right? So first of all, I think the way you described the initial problem statement, that was actually good. That why you need to do proteomics, right? But in terms of your understanding for this particular objective, what would you like to state in one line that what was the objective of the project?
To find the proteins to find biomarkers which would be used for understanding the reoccurrence, like which proteins we will find, if there is a reoccurrence of meningioma, which proteins are seen in skull-based and supratentorial region.
All right, I think it's correctly described. Yeah, and you're looking at those could also be indicative of the aggressiveness, of the tumor, and eventually the tumor might recur as well, right? In your correlation plot as well as the PCA, did you made observation that there was at least one sample which was sort of outlier?
Which was?
From the correlation plot as well as your PCA plots, did you try to make some observation that was there any sample which is outlier?
Yeah, actually the sample 9 was kind of outlier, but in correlation plot it was like showing a good correlation, so I didn't remove it.
Okay, yeah, but one could from the I think skull based, probably it was that sample that was slightly off.
Okay.
Yeah. So finally looking at, by the way, your heat map was supervised or unsupervised?
It was supervised.
Correct. And your major observation from the role of the different protein which you were looking at, large number of proteins which you had, you picked up fibrillin as one of the important protein. What is your understanding of this protein in context of comparing, these two subtype of tumors?
Okay, so fibrillin is mostly present in supratentorial region, and it has its role in extracellular matrix organization and cell adhesion. So it is upregulated in supratentorial region, but I didn't see it in skull base. Like it is downregulated in skull base. So mostly it is upregulated in supratentorial region.
Okay, and among the pathways, you had a large number of pathways which you showed, and then you on PI3-AKT pathway, right? So was there any correlation, for example, if you get some top hit proteins like fibrillin, right, and or testing proteins like that, did you make any observation or effort to correlate some of these proteins within the context of the pathway which you're observing?
I think fibrillin also activates like cell proliferation. Like I'm not sure. I didn't see that much.
Somewhere you mentioned about ECM remodeling, extracellular matrix, and that was actually quite linked to fibrillin and fibrillin like fibrillin 5 protein. So that was good. But I just wanted to also explain that when you have large number of pathways, you have to then bring little bit understanding of the disease and try to take few pathways which you already see, like large number of proteins are showing higher fold change, right? So which proteins are actually mapping to those pathways, then try to club those together and then make better understanding of those pathways. But overall, I think it was nicely explained. So that's all from my side. Good.
Thank you.
All right, let's move on to next presentation now. Okay, so Abhinav is going to talk in next presentation about pituitary tumors, looking at acromegaly as compared to controls and what could be possible classifier which can be obtained from the machine learning approach. All right, so let's listen to Abhinav.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Abhinav Pingi, and I am a fourth year undergrad student in the Computer Science and Engineering department. My project topic for BB607 course is a deep proteomics analysis of acromegaly versus control samples for identification of classifiers through machine learning approach. The contents of my presentation include the introduction to the acromegaly disease, the workflow of my project, the dataset specifics and normalization, metaboanalyst analysis, orange workflow and results, reactome analysis, correlation of my findings with literature, and bibliography. This picture is provided here to give you an idea of acromegaly. As you can see, the development of facial features is a symptom of acromegaly, but given the time gap of 11 years between the first and last photos, we can't really say whether it is due to acromegaly or due to aging. So this is what makes detecting acromegaly difficult. Let's see more about acromegaly. Acromegaly is a rare and slowly progressive disorder that affects adults. It occurs when the pituitary gland produces too much growth hormone, and also in conjunction to growth hormone, it also produces the insulin-like growth factors, but it's a consequence of producing too much growth hormones. In most patients, acromegaly is caused by the growth of a benign tumor adenoma arising from the pituitary gland. Symptoms of acromegaly include abnormal enlargement in bones of the hands, arms, feet, legs, and head. Enlargement of the bones in the jaws and in the front of the skull are typically the most apparent bony changes. Acromegaly may also cause thickening of the soft tissues of the body, including the heart, lips, and tongue. Acromegaly, if left untreated, can potentially cause serious illness and life-threatening complications. When excessive secretion of growth hormone occurs before puberty, it is called gigantism, and it should not be confused with acromegaly. Pituitary adenomas may occur by chance or can be inherited by families, or they also may occur as part of another condition. Familial isolated pituitary adenoma occurs when the AIP or GPR101 gene is not working properly, which means the DNA changes known as pathogenic variants are making the genes work incorrectly or sometimes not at all. The project workflow follows this order. The output of the MaxQuant file that have been provided is put through MetaBioAnalyst for further analysis and normalization of data. After then, the normalized data is downloaded and further analyzed through Orange using machine learning methods. After that, after selecting a specified set of features after the data analysis, those features are passed through string and then through Reactome for pathway analysis and to find any possible correlations with literature for verifying the veracity of my findings. The dataset that I have been given consists of 27 samples with each having 2499 features, which is a very high number. But so obviously we won't need this much to classify between acromegaly and control. So we are further going to reduce this to a very low number in the coming slides. The missing value percentage is 0%, so there is no need for that missing value imputation. The number of outliers was 3 as was detected by me using Orange. As you can see, the data before and after normalization is represented here, and after normalization, the data almost is like a Gaussian curve, which is as expected. The data, when put through MetaBioAnalyst and gave some interesting results. The samples of POS and ANT, which are control samples, are strongly correlated with each other of their own class, while the acro class samples are also correlated to each other, but to some extent, but they are not as correlated as the POS and ANT samples. If we examine the heat map by using the top 25 proteins and their values in the samples, we can clearly see that some of them have a high value in the control samples and less value in the acromegaly samples, and some proteins have the reverse trend. They have high value in acromegaly and low value in control. This trend clearly suggests that we can select a subset of proteins which can be used to differentiate between acromegaly and control, and without having to use the whole 2499 features. For further analysis of using string and MetaBioAnalyst, I have taken some further analysis of the data. These include the volcano plot as shown here, and the proteins with high VAP scores in PLSTA. Both of these are used in conjunction with my Orange features later, so to get more idea about the pathways and their analysis. The number of significantly upregulated proteins in my volcanic plot was 339, and the significantly down was 309. As shown here, a majority of proteins were unchanged because they were not that much important for classifying the samples. After normalizing the data, and we can finally go through the Orange workflow. Here I have taken the samples and ranked the features using the ANOVA algorithm. I have checked for outliers before and even after ranking. This is what here is how I check the outliers and visualize them using a scatter plot in Orange. After ranking the data, we can I passed it through a data table to learners like SVM and random forest and neural network. Using only 10 features, random forest and SVM and even neural network were able to predict the samples accurately, with precision and recall both being one, and the confusion matrix looking like this, even when the outliers were included in the data. To test the hypothesis that whether giving whole of the data as both train and test data was leading to this, I also rerouted the data into a data sampler and took the sample of data as input as a train data, and the sample as test data. This picture shows it for neural network. We have done it for SVM and random forest too, but I would have not shown them because the workflow picture here becomes very clumsy then. As we can see, and even when I take two different non-overlapping subsets and train the model on that, it's again classifying it correctly, which means we can rule out the hypothesis whether it's overfitting the data or the null hypothesis that I'm training on train and again using it in on test. So my features selected by ranking were very much giving the accuracy of and recall of 1, which means they are a good subset of data to differentiate between acromegaly and its control. This list shows the top 25 proteins from MetaBiome list and Orange. The 10 features that I have used in Orange after ranking them by using ANOVA are listed on the left hand side, and the another 15 proteins I have taken from Orange. These include those from the volcano plot and the VAP and the PLSDA VAP top VAP score proteins. Many of these proteins were also in the proteins that I have got from MetaBiome list. So after taking them, after removing the duplicates, I was left with 25 proteins, which is a good number for my further analysis of pathways and their correlation with acromegaly. This picture is the output of my string analysis for this 25 proteins. As you can see, these proteins are some of these proteins are very strongly connected to each other, whereas a significant number of them are largely single node clusters without having many common properties with the other proteins. After taking those 25 proteins and passing them through reactome, I have obtained a total of 341 pathways. And after filtering those pathways to have a p-value of less than or equal to less than 0.05, I have got total of 69 pathways. All of those pathways are listed here. So after this, I have gone through the. After this, I have gone through my pathways, and I have decided to explain about two important pathways that are related to acromegaly and also supported by literature. One is GPCR downstream signaling. It is as the name suggests, it includes GPCRs, which are G protein coupled receptors. These are defined as the receptors, and the G proteins are the primary signaling molecule, the alpha subunit of the G protein. GPCRs are involved in many diverse signaling events using a variety of pathways that include modulation of adenylyl cyclase, phospholipase C, MAPKs, ERK, GNK, and P38 MAPK. Regulation of G protein signaling proteins can directly inhibit the activity of G alpha subunit, The general function of the G-alpha S subunit is to activate adenylate cyclase, which in turn produces cyclic AMP, and it leads to the activation of CMP-dependent protein kinases, often referred to as protein kinase A. So, as we'll see, the G-alpha S subunit is are involved in a pathway which is important for acromegaly, and the G protein signaling pathway in affects them, thus by affecting acromegaly. Then the second pathway that I wanted to explain about is GPCR ligand binding. There are more than 800 G protein coupled receptors in the human genome, which makes it the largest receptor superfamily. GPCRs are also the largest class of drug targets involved in virtually all physiological processes. Classical GPCR signaling involves signal transduction via heterotrimeric G proteins through G protein independent mechanisms have been reported. Rhodopsin-like receptors are by far the largest group of GPCRs. Family A includes receptors for a wide variety of ligands, including hormones, light, and neurotransmitters, encompassing a wide range of functions, including many autocrine, paracrine, and endocrine processes. The pathways that I have listed before as being the output of reactome for the input 20 to 25 proteins data, and so some have some correlation of pathways related to acromegaly found in the literature. We can see the pathways that have a correlation with acromegaly in the literature. This suggests the significance of my analysis that it's on the track by identifying significant classifiers for acromegaly and control, and also identifying important proteins that are involved in various pathways related to acromegaly. There was a protein that was identified which was mentioned in the literature as being directly connected to acromegaly, which is POMC or uniproteidy P0.1189. There was also another protein P02788, which was correlated with P02768 on string, and P02768 is directly involved in the regulation of insulin-like growth factors, which is the which if you remember is the main cause of acromegaly, which is caused by the unregulated release of those insulin growth factors. So, but since that was an indirect link, I have decided to omit it here, and this one is more directly and found in the literature as I mentioned the sources here. So that verifies the veracity of my findings to classify acromegaly and its control. And there are also some significance of my findings which because of their correlation with the literature.
All right. Abhinav, are you there?
Yes, sir. Hello.
Yes. All right. Yeah. So, yeah, it is actually, now we got different flavor from your presentation to start with the machine learning approaches. Okay. And first thing, when you mentioned about there were 3 outliers, in the acromegaly group, and you removed those based on the orange. You have not shown any data, like what was your rationale of those 3 outliers, how you thought about them as outlier. Can you explain that?
Okay. I first passed the data in orange before passing it through MetaBandlist to identify those outliers. They were actually lying on the somewhat near the boundary of the 95% confidence interval in the PCA plots. So I thought there may be those may be some outliers, and my hypothesis was confirmed when I saw that these outliers were having these were recognized as outliers with at most 10% contamination in orange by having different values. I mean, by having outlying values for different proteins like many proteins actually. So that was my rationale for detecting them as outliers and removing.
Right. See, I think, any rationale what you have should be shown with data, right? That's what you're doing a project here. And we would like to know your rationale, how you do that, especially as you have seen, others are showing correlation plots and looking at principal component. And you can further confirm that with orange. So all that could have been shown in one slide is stating that because, you cannot handpick the data and remove it. In science and research, you have to have the rationale about if you are removing something, why you are removing something. So that has to be justified. Other comment was once you have identified the set of proteins from your analysis, I think you took the entire data for analysis, right? In the beginning, you took all the controls, which are very few, and then all the patients, acromegaly, and did your analysis, and then you came with a list of protein, which you also tried to correlate with the metabolite list, right?
Yeah.
So an alternative strategy could have been that at least some of the patient sample could not have been analyzed in the first pass in the beginning. And once you have identified your set of biomarker as the most influential protein, then you can try to use the unanalyzed data of some of the patients to try to make predictions in the more kind of blinded analysis. So it's always important, like this kind of machine learning approaches, to have some data which could be your discovery data, some could be validation data, some could be blinded validation data set. So did you think anything along those lines?
Yeah, yes, sir. I mean, if you see, I have already told that I have divided the data into test train, and some was validation I didn't do, but I divided into test and train, and then train my model on the train data and then on test data, and I verified whether it was performing well or not.
Right. So again, the next after this is a blinded validation, which means you do not know set of samples. Are they control or are they, acromegaly?
No, sir. They have taken stratified sampling, so that at least the proportion of those things in the train and test remain almost the same, so that there will be at least some sense of taking it as test data.
All right. And while it was not too much expected from you to look at the biological pathways, but still I think you made good effort of understanding GPR signaling, which was looking quite interesting in context of acromegaly. There are a few proteins which you have also highlighted in the part of that pathways, including some protein which are linked to kinases like JNK kinase and P38, those proteins. Those are quite interesting connect, which one could try to understand better. I will leave you with the thoughts right now, given the short time we have. But look at some of the important protein which are part of the GPR signaling, and then see like how they can be better understand in context of acromegaly. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Yeah. Good start of the machine learning projects. Now let's take the last one. Okay. So now we have a presentation from Aparna. And she's going to talk about, again, brain tumor glioblastoma, but in a different context. She'll be speaking about a specific mutation, isocitrate dehydrogenase, which has been become very important for glioblastoma. Let's see, what she tried to decipher from these two groups of the glioblastoma, IDH positive and negative.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Aparna Chauhan, a first-year MTech biomedical engineering student, and today I am presenting the topic Global Proteomics Analysis of IDH positive versus IDH negative glioblastoma samples, and I'll be applying machine learning approach to decipher biological alterations in those samples. So, glioblastoma is a grade 4 tumor, which is very common and aggressive type of brain tumor found among the adults. The typical molecular changes that occur in glioblastoma cells are majorly mutations in the three critical genes, which are receptor tyrosine kinase, also known as phosphorinositide PI3 or PI3 kinase and P53 and retinoblastoma genes. The standard treatment for glioblastoma includes surgery, radiotherapy, and alkylating chemotherapy. We also need to know the significance of IDH in glioblastoma, as we will be distinguishing between IDH positive and IDH negative phenotypes in glioblastoma patients. So IDH is isocitrate dehydrogenase enzyme, which has an important role in Krebs cycle. As you can see here, it is responsible for oxidative decarboxylation of isocitrate, and the mutant IDH causes various changes in the pathways, causing sideline pathways and impacting various related pathways to this cycle. So as you can see here, the mutant IDH is causing conversion of alpha ketoglutarate to HG, which is 2-hydroxyglutarate, which is basically a oncometabolite, which directly or indirectly impacts several other pathways, such as NAD biosynthesis or glutamate biosynthesis pathway, besides also impacting the ubiquitination of hypoxia-inducing factor to imposing an effect on the enzyme PHD2. So it can be seen that the mutant IDH is responsible for various changes in pathways in the Krebs cycle, and thus it may have an impact on the treatment, diagnosis, and various aspects of glioblastoma. It is to be noted here that IDH mutation is in fact favorable for the disease outcome, increasing the median survival from about 15 months to 31 months for IDH positive patients, which can be attributed to the fact that IDH mutant lead to ER stress-mediated apoptosis of the cancer cells, as can be seen on the right-hand side section of the image, in which the IDH mutant is producing 2-HG, which in turn is leading to an increased production of miRNA 183, which in turn is causing suppression of the apoptotic suppressor SEMA3E, which is leading to apoptosis of the cancer cells, which is one of the reasons that the cancer patients with IDH positive mutation survive for longer in glioblastoma patients. And no such alteration is seen in IDH wild type, and hence the lower median survival rate. However, it is also to be noted that although IDH glioma generally exhibits a better disease outcome, the higher incidence of IDH mutations in secondary GBM suggests that lower grade glioma with IDH mutation often have a high chance of reoccurrence, and this phenotype leads to hypermutation phenotype as well, which is leading to worsened prognosis among the glioblastoma patients, and thus we need to distinguish between IDH positive and IDH negative patients for better treatment and diagnostic abilities for this tumor. So I was provided a file which was already processed in MathFont, and I proceeded with the analysis using MetaboAnalyst, String, Reactome, Metascape, Panther, and finally applying machine learning using Python 3, which was done in Jupyter Notebook. The MathFont file looked something like this, which consisted of total 17 samples, of which 9 were IDH positive and 8 were IDH negative. Then I used this file as input into MetaboAnalyst, and I checked how many missing values we have, and it was seen that there were 14% missing values, and the features were around 2,200. And we needed to impute the missing values. Although the percentage was not very high, I wanted to check some of the parameters, such as what will happen if I remove all the missing values, or take a very stringent criteria of removing features with greater than 20% missing values, or a slightly less stringent criteria of taking values which were removing values which were greater than 30% features which were missing values. So I inputted all these values into MetaboAnalyst and saw what was the difference I was obtaining in terms of classification of samples into IDH positive and IDH negative. And in the PLSTA plot, as you can see here, if I remove all the missing values, the classification was quite overlapping. So I did not choose removing all the missing values. However, I did go ahead with choosing greater than 20% criteria because quite a good distinction was obtained in this case. So finally, I also checked the features which were important for classification into IDH positive and IDH negative. And many of these features were missing when I removed all the features with missing values. So I went ahead with the second one, which is the greater than 20% criteria. And the remaining missing values were calculated using KNN feature-wise. The next step was normalization, and it was carried out by median, and log transformation was also carried out, and a very good Gaussian distribution was obtained. So I took the file further for further analysis. The PCA and PLSDA plot was seen again, and we can see that PCA could not give such a good distinction. but PSDA gave quite a good distinction between the samples, so the VIP features were also checked. So as you can see here, quite a few features were important for classification into IDH positive and IDH negative samples. The next was correlation and heat map analysis. We could not see a very good correlation between IDH positive and IDH negative samples, as they were quite randomly distributed in the correlation plot. There was a linear correlation between the same samples, but there was not a very distinct classification of IDH positive and IDH negative in this. In the heat map, we could see that some of the proteins were upregulated and some were downregulated in the IDH positive phenotype, as can be seen in the left-hand section. And I took top 20 proteins for the heat map analysis, but some features were, some of the samples were misclassified into the IDH negative phenotype, even though they belong to the IDH positive sample. This may be because that this IDH positive and negative are part of the same tumor, and very distinct protein profiles might not be seen in such cases. Also, the samples were very low, only 70, so we could not surely say that these samples belong to these classes. The next was fold change and t-test analysis. The fold change showed 89 significantly upregulated and 99 significantly downregulated proteins, while the t-test with the p-value cutoff of 0.05 showed that significant proteins were 69. Finally, the volcano plot was seen. The fold change was taken to be 2. The p-value threshold was taken 0.05, and the raw unpaired criteria was selected, and I found that significantly upregulated were 18 proteins and significantly downregulated were 17 proteins. So the total 35 significant IDs were taken for further pathway analysis using string, reactome, metascape, and anther. In the reactome pathway, the pathway of interest I could find was the mitochondrial fatty acid beta oxidation, which was significantly downregulated, as can be seen using the GSCA or gene set enrichment analysis. Besides, other pathways such as mitotic G2G2M phase transition and G2M transition, along with translocation of glucose transporter 4 to the plasma membrane pathways, were significantly upregulated. Of all these, I will be talking about some of the pathways later. I also used Panther to see which categories the proteins which were significantly up or down regulated belong to. As can be seen, they belong to the catalytic activity in case of molecular function, and the biological processes they formed were majorly cellular processes and some metabolic processes. And the protein category they belong to were majorly metabolite interconversion enzyme, and for the pathways they were nearly uniformly distributed. Next was the metascape. I used the 35 significantly up and down regulated genes from volcano plot of metaboanalysis, and saw that these proteins majorly belong to the monocarboxylic acid metabolic process and the arginine proline metabolism process, and some belong to mitochondrial transport, temperature homeostasis, and I'll be also talking about the common pathways that came in all the analysis, including reactome, metascape, and string later. So from string and David bioinformatics, the most enriched KEGG pathway came out to be arginine and proline metabolism. Besides, fatty acid metabolism, the biosynthesis also showing up in the wiki pathway when I analyzed the significantly up-down related proteins using string. So here are some of the proteins shown. The blue ones belong to mitochondria, while the red ones are those which play a part in arginine protein metabolism, while the green ones play a role in fatty acid biosynthesis. So I selected the arginine protein metabolism pathway, and when I searched literature, I found a study which showed that the metabolites that were involved in the arginine protein pathway were significantly different in the IDH mutation and IDH wild-type patient, GBM patients. And thus, I concluded that this pathway could in fact serve as an important biomarker in identifying IDH positive versus the IDH negative patients. And although it needs some further analysis to, strongly say that it is kind of a biomarker, but other omics study can be done for the same. So next was mitochondrial fatty acid beta oxidation. It is one of the most widely studied pathways for brain tumors, and it is responsible for beta oxidation of fatty acids. And the twin pathways of fatty acid synthesis and beta oxidation provide energy and raw material for cancer cell growth, and thus the pathway is quite important in tumorigenesis of brain tumors. Also, it is to be noted that the enzyme fatty acid synthesis has a significant role to play in this particular pathway. The final pathway I chose was translocation of GLUT4. This pathway did not come up in any of the literature that I studied for glioblastomas. So I concluded that this, although it was significantly upregulated in various tumors, but no role could be identified for glioblastoma till date. So I kind of inferred that this pathway could in fact serve as a major therapeutic target, as the glucotransport activity is actually correlated with proliferation of cells, cancer cells in tumors. So if we regulate this pathway, we might actually control the development or progression of tumor in glioblastomas. Finally, I had to perform machine learning, which I did using Jupyter Notebook, and Python 3 was used. I tested 3 algorithms, which are random forest, support vector machines, and naive Bayes. And the process data was taken from MetaboAnalyst, for which the samples were normalized and as well as log transformed. And the features were 1601 as the features with greater than 20% missing values were removed. So here I ran 3 trials. As I had shown earlier, the VIP plot, which was obtained using PLSDA and MetaboAnalyst, if I took all the features, the machine learning algorithms were giving very poor outcome, giving the accuracy of only about 33%. So I took the important features, which were according to the PLSDA VIP, and then ran 3 trials with taking top 10, 15, and 20 VIP features. And as you can see, the top 15 VIP features gave the best results with 86% accuracy, precision of 1 and 0.75. And similarly, I did for SVM, which is support vector machine, and again, the 15 VIP features were best here. And finally, I did the same thing for naive Bayes, and the 15 VIP features again were best for this algorithm. And when I plotted the ROC plots and taking all the previously measured parameters such as accuracy, precision, and recall, the random forest gave the best results for classification of the samples into IDH positive versus IDH negative phenotype. So the following points I concluded from the data I analyzed that GBM is one of the most aggressive primary brain tumor types, and IDH positive phenotype has a significant impact on how we diagnose or treat the cancer. Thus, there needs to be a clear distinction between IDH positive and IDH negative patients for effective treatment strategies to be developed. And since the IDH mutation worsens the prognostic ability as well, machine learning can in fact help in better prediction of of glioblastomas if a good algorithm is selected. The 3 major pathways that came up were arginine proline metabolism, mitochondrial fatty acid beta oxidation, and translocation of SLC2A4 or glucose transporter 4 to plasma membrane, of which the first 2 are significantly downregulated, and the last one is significantly upregulated. Finally, machine learning was applied to distinguish between IDH positive and IDH negative phenotypes, and it can be seen that we could obtain quite a good accuracy even with such less number of samples. If we are given more samples, then we can come up with even better prediction, and thus we can classify the patients into IDH positive and IDH negative, and thus develop treatment strategies accordingly. Finally, I would like to thank Professor Sanjeev Srivastava, who gave me this incredible project to work upon. Also, I would like to thank the TAs who gave us all the demos of the tools and were there at each step of the learning and project. Lastly, I would like to thank all my colleagues who are part of the spectators today. And these are some of the references you can.
All right, Aparna, are you there? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right, yeah. So, yeah, good presentation. Let's talk a few things about your project. So, do you know, the glioma classification is keep getting revised, right? And there are even more recent glioma classification. Glioblastoma is one of the grades, right, which is the highest grade, grade 4. But overall, glioma classification goes through WHO schemes of classification. What is the major consideration over there currently based on the how to classify the glioma tumors?
I think from the literature that I had read, mainly the gliomas were the initial first and second grade tumors, and then above the 4th grade they were classified as glioblastoma. And also there was something related to fluorescence, but I'm not exactly remember what was the basis of classification there.
Right. So I think IDH, isolated dehydrogenase mutation, has become one of the very important criteria now, even for the classification as well. And that's where additional importance of the understanding the IDH mutation is important right now, because the entire classification scheme is based on at least one of this is a very important feature for IDH mutation. When you look at different missing values, I think I like the way you showed 0%, 20%, and 30% missing values and selected one of those. But finally, when you get the heat map, that was, I think, supervised or unsupervised. What was the heat map?
So it was unsupervised.
Correct. So in the unsupervised heat map, you see the different patches, right? Different are misclassified. Some are coming into the positive and some are coming in negative group. So what could have been your interpretation over there? When you have this kind of pattern, one group is IDH positive, one is IDH negative, but they are not falling into the same groups. What could be thoughts?
One of the possibilities can be like the IDH affects various other pathways. So there might be in those 3 samples, there might be mutations in the pathways such as NAD biosynthesis or glutamate, which are not letting the IDH mutation actually impact them, and thus the proteins up and down regulated are not that much different as compared to IDH negative patients.
Correct. So these are good observations. I think something along these lines, when you get, some patients are misclassified, one could look at what else other mutation they have, what else is going on, what was the lineage, primary or secondary glioblastomas, right? So those things could also be then tried to look into the factor of classification. Finally, what are the main protein which you think are crucial here to segregate IDH mutant and wild type?
So there were 3 proteins which belong to the arginine proline metabolism, which were prolyl hydrolase, and there was I don't remember the full form. It was ADH, and these were significantly down-regulated, and thus can be studied further to see what is the impact of these proteins in IDH positive patients. Besides, there were some fatty acid biosynthesis proteins as well, which were involved in beta oxidation as well as biosynthesis of fatty acid, which can also be looked upon for the same.
All right. So again, given that many of the things which you are describing are quite important for metabolism, right? One future direction could have been also described to look at metabolomics-based investigation of these patients and those samples, because a lot of arginine and proline and various other thing which you have identified could also be then further investigated using metabolomics, right? I think Avinash is having one question about accuracy of your models.
Okay, so for the random forest, I got 86% accuracy, and for the SVM and Naive Bayes, I got around 85%, somewhere in between. But the samples were very less, so I cannot conclude that it was a very good model.
Right. All right. So that's all for Aparna and for all the presenters. So today I think we had some very good presentations. We had 5 presenters, all of them uploaded videos pretty much on time and kept the presentations also to the time. So the next lecture, which is on the Friday, due to holiday of Dussehra, we are not going to have presentation on that day. So next presentations will be due on following Wednesday after a week. I wish all of you, happy holidays, but please don't forget that you have presentations due as well on the next Wednesday. So then don't ask me that you can run prepare for it. Do utilize the time to make good presentations, and we are improving the quality as we go along, and all of you are making good efforts, which is quite satisfying to us that, in a short time, all of you are able to make so much sense of the data and able to bring some very interesting biology from that. That's all from our side. Good luck, everyone. We will meet you again on next Wednesday. Thank you.